Two medium-sized American banks that have profited from the tech and crypto bubbles collapsed last week as the world looked on in shock. While Wall Street was fretting about a possible banking crisis and a global recession, a potentially more important story with far-reaching global repercussions was unfolding quietly away from American shores. On March 11th, oil-rich Iran and Saudi Arabia, sworn enemies and the leaders of the two opposing branches of Islam, mended their differences after 7 years of hostility and agreed to reestablish the diplomatic relationship and reopen their embassies within 2 months. Moreover, this agreement was brokered not by the United States, but by China. This agreement is a sign of a paradigm shift in the Middle East and the rise of a China-centric world order, and yet it is being downplayed by the defensive Biden administration. Is Washington's skepticism justified? Is this a durable peace? What is China's calculation? Has the U.S. lost its influence in the Middle East? And what does this peace agreement mean for Israel, which Iran seeks to destroy? Hi, I'm David Wu, a former Wall Street strategist with a 20-year track record of making actionable predictions about major global change. Welcome to The Money Game, where I take on groupthink, propaganda, and conspiracy theories in my critical analysis of markets, economics, and politics. Before we begin, please hit subscribe and the bell button so that you will be notified when a new video comes out.
The initial reaction here from the administration on China brokering this deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Good news, concerning news, or both?
Anything that can bring tensions down in the region is welcome, Chuck. And if this can help us end that war in Yemen, if it can help the Saudi people feel more comfortable that they're not going to be attacked from the Houthi rebels that are supported by Iran, then we welcome that.
Washington's skepticism about the sustainability of the new peace agreement is not entirely unfounded. Iran and Saudi Arabia have been at each other's throats in fighting multiple proxy wars across the Middle East over the past decade. Their conflict is not only a struggle for influence between the two largest economies in the Middle East, but a rivalry between two main sects within Islam, the Sunni and the Shia, that have been going on for 1,500 years. Saudi Arabia has a predominantly Sunni population, while Iran is the home to the largest Shiite population in the world. In 2016, Saudi Arabia cut diplomatic ties with Iran after protesters against the execution of a Shiite cleric in Saudi Arabia stormed the Saudi embassy in Tehran and set it ablaze. Almost every proxy war the two countries have been engaging in is drawn across sectarian lines. For example, in Yemen's civil war, Saudi Arabia backs the majority Sunni population that lives in the south, while Iran backs the Shia Houthi rebels who live primarily in the north. In the Syrian civil war, Iran backs President Bashar al-Assad, a member of the country's Alawite minority that's an offshoot of Shia Islam. Saudi Arabia backs the Free Syrian Army that consists mostly of Sunnis. In Lebanon, Saudi Arabia backs the Sunnis who control the office of the prime minister under the 1943 National Pact. Iran backs Hezbollah, the Shia Islamist party and militant group that wants to establish an Islamic state. So much blood has been spilled in these conflicts involving the Sunnis on one hand and the Shias on the other, not to mention the money spent by the two adversaries, that it is understandable why many observers think this deal only buys time and not real peace. From a realist point of view, the only reason why a country would choose war over peace is because war would advance its interests more. There are two reasons why the cost-benefit calculations for war are changing for both Iran and Saudi Arabia. One, the proxy wars that Saudi Arabia and Iran have been fighting have not advanced the interests of either. In Yemen, the civil war already in its 9th year remains in a stalemate. Airstrikes by the Saudi coalition that has killed tens of thousands, including civilians, has invited international condemnation, but have not fundamentally altered the balance in the war. In Lebanon, the economic collapse since 2019 has eroded the popularity of the Iranian-backed Hezbollah. that has lost its parliamentary majority in the election of May 2022. Iran may have gained influence in Lebanon, but in the process it turned the country into a failed state. Last month, Lebanon devalued its exchange rate by 90%. Iran and Saudi Arabia seem to have finally come to the conclusion that their efforts to restrict one another's sphere of influence are simply too costly to continue. Two, in both countries, domestic priorities are winning over foreign ones, although for very different reasons. In Iran, the protest that broke out following the death of a young woman detained by the country's morality police has continued despite a harsh crackdown that has killed hundreds and detained thousands. While there have been no visible cracks within the ruling elite and armed forces, this is nevertheless the biggest challenge to the country's clerical rule since its founding in 1979. Economic hardship, a collapsing currency, and falling standards of living are contributing to anger against the government. There are reports that Tehran has been forced recently to cut back its financial assistance to Hezbollah and Hamas even. The trip by the Iranian president to Beijing last month and the peace agreement with Saudi Arabia could be telling us that the beleaguered Iranian leadership simply wants to project to the Iranian public a shift towards a more constructive foreign policy stance. In Saudi Arabia, where the ruling family is enjoying strong public support, things look quite different. The Saudi economy grew 8.7% in 2022 to reach $1 trillion for the first time ever. The economy of the largest oil exporter in the world remains highly dependent on its energy sector, but is starting to see the first fruit of its implementation of Vision 2030, an ambitious program of reforms to help diversify and liberalize the economy and pave the way to more stable growth. But with 30% of the kingdom's population under the age of 15, and with youth unemployment rate at over 25%, the Saudi rulers understand that time is not on their side, especially if the world continues to move away from its dependence on fossil fuels. It is easy to see why the Saudi rulers may want to ease tension with Iran so they can focus even more on transforming the Saudi economy. Furthermore, Saudi Arabia has not been shy about the fact that it wants to become a global player on the international stage. In this respect, its apparent strong interest in joining the BRICS club, which is considering to admit new members later this year, would also argue for resolving its differences with its main regional rival. There may be another reason for Riyadh to make peace with Iran at this time. It is often thought that if Israel should decide to launch a preemptive attack on Iranian nuclear capabilities, Iran could retaliate by hitting the Gulf countries first. A Saudi-Iran peace agreement might make Iran think twice. By the way, last month, there was a report suggesting that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with his defense minister, his army chief, and the head of Mossad on at least 5 separate occasions to discuss an attack on Iran. While Beijing gets credit for pulling off the seemingly impossible by brokering the peace agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, it cannot be denied that Washington's actions over the past year have helped bring the parties together, if unintentionally so. As much as the Biden administration will probably hate to admit it, the US-led sanctions against Russia have helped unify countries that are not democracies and that want to see a world with more balanced power sharing. In case you're wondering, this is called the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Biden has portrayed the war in Ukraine as a fight between democracy and autocracy. Moreover, his administration has shown that sanctions can be weaponized against countries that fall foul of Washington's world order. If sanctions have not brought down the Russian economy, it is only because the sound Russian macroeconomic policies of the past 10 years that left Russia with a twin surpluses versus America's twin deficits before the sanctions hit. This is why countries in the so-called global south have an incentive to deepen ties, will work out the differences because they have a better chance to stand up to the United States if they're united. China needs allies to be able to counter America's new policy of containment. China needs strong allies. To attract strong allies and keep the alliance strong, China needs to be seen as acting in the interest of the alliance, promoting the common good. This is why we can safely assume that Beijing will use all its leverage with Iran and Saudi Arabia to make sure that the peace between the two is durable. China does have leverage. In 2021, China and Iran signed a sweeping 25-year deal with $400 billion of Chinese investments in exchange for oil. During President Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia last December, the two countries signed 35 agreements worth in total $30 billion in a wide range of areas from green energy to construction. The agreements are calibrated to align Saudi's 2030 plan and China's Belt and Road Initiative. There are also reports that China is planning to host an unprecedented summit later this year to be attended by senior officials from Iran and its 6 Arab neighbors of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. How will the US react to the new agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran? How will Israel react? All else being equal, the peace agreement makes the normalization of diplomatic ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia less likely. If the Saudis needed an Israeli defense umbrella to keep Iranian military expansion in check, the sense of urgency has receded somewhat. The same thing could be probably said about the chance of an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. The Saudis last July gave Israeli airlines permission to use its airspace for eastbound flights to India and China. But would the Saudis give Israel its airspace for an attack on Iran? Probably not. However, Israel might also judge that the Iranian threat is lower, given China has an obvious incentive to maintain peace in the region. The Middle East might see calm that should be bullish for investments in the region. What about the US? Will Washington be content with the new peace in the Middle East? Or would it try to sabotage it to weaken China in the realignment of the global South? Hard to say. However, if Seymour Hersh is right that the US blew up the Nord Stream pipelines to preempt any negotiation between Germany and Russia, then the Biden administration is capable of stirring up the pot in the Middle East as a way to regain influence. A lot is riding on the outcome of the war in Ukraine that will decide the direction of US foreign policy after the 2024 elections. I will be holding my breath. If you got something out of this program, please hit like and subscribe to my free YouTube channel. If you want to learn more about my investment strategy, come visit us at davidwunbound.com.